Right now, there is a triple whammy of infections in the United States, and they are influenza or common flu, COVID-19, and RSV, which is a respiratory virus. And all of these are surging earlier in the year than usual, and they're filling beds, particularly in pediatric hospitals. So if you haven't heard of RSV, it's been circulating, I believe, uh, for the last couple months in a heavy way, and it's respiratory. And the main victims are people with weak immune systems and also kids. So I'm going to talk today about what works and what doesn't work for treating influenza, COVID-19, and RSV. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this, and be sure to hit the alert button to be notified of new videos each week. So first of all, I do want to say that if you have acute influenza, COVID-19, or RSV, please seek medical attention. So these techniques are meant to be used for people who have more minor symptoms, or people who are waiting to seek, or waiting to get in to see the doctor, or waiting to see the hospital. And this is a big deal because one of my friends who I interviewed for the Get Well Now series actually was turned away from the hospital. And during the acute COVID-19, they said, "You're not dying. When you're dying, come back to the hospital. We can't treat you right now." So it behooves all of us to take responsibility for our own health and our family's health, particularly our children's health. So, what works and what doesn't work for flu, RSV, and COVID 19? So, the first thing that doesn't work is taking antibiotics. And we know that, but there's a knee jerk reaction, especially when our kid is, screaming and has whooping cough. I got to give something for my kids so that they can breathe. But antibiotics are not effective for viral infections. Now, in mainstream medical settings, sometimes they used to use antibiotics preventively, but now they don't do that anymore because they're spreading antibiotic resistance. So that's the reason we don't want to take antibiotics unnecessarily, because it makes the antibiotics less efficacious because there's antibiotic resistance. So we don't want to take antibiotics unless a particular MD tells us that we have a bacterial infection. Um, the other thing that doesn't work is use remedies that are made in China and India. And although I like Chinese herbs, I like some Indian herbs. But the problem with using the remedies, that is the pills and powders, and even tea bags, is we just don't know what's in these substances. And in Indian and Chinese remedies, they found heavy levels of lead and other minerals, metals, but they've also found pharmaceutical drugs. And so the whole reason people use herbs and nutrients is to get away from drugs. And here they are showing up in Chinese and Indian herbal products. And in some cases, there may be drugs that are so dangerous that they're banned in the United States. And there was a pain formula out of China some years ago, and it worked great. And it had things like, it didn't have fentanyl, but it had ibuprofen, and it had Celebrex, and it had all these pharmaceuticals. And then it had one anti-inflammatory that was banned in the United States. So don't use remedies made in China and India. If you do use the whole herbs, make sure that these herbs are tested before you ingest them. The other thing that doesn't work in influenza and the other infections is strenuous exercise. So, where it may be a good idea to get out of the house, you want to get out of the house for ventilation reasons. And it doesn't hurt to do a little walking, but you want to avoid strenuous exercise because that can depress the immune system, and you can not get healthy. You can fail to get healthy if you keep uh, exercising or working out while you're sick. Then what also doesn't work is not resting. So some people some people just try to wait it out. They go, okay, take some aspirin, take some over the counter cold and flu remedies, and I'll just power through this. Again, the body can really resist that and can go to total breakdown. So you want to rest when you have a viral infection. Uh, Also doesn't work to stay to failure to stay hydrated and failure to promote good sleep. So we want to make sure that we're drinking water and teas as much as possible to stay hydrated. And sometimes even exercise drinks can be useful to supply sodium and also potassium if you have influenza. So staying hydrated is very important. Now, what really works in treating cold or influenza COVID-19? Again, severe infections, seek out medical treatment. But in general, taking herbs at the first sign of a cold or flu makes them work much better. And these are the cases where we can knock out a cold or flu from beginning if we take enough herbs or nutrients early enough. And the nutrients I'm mainly talking about are like vitamin D or perhaps vitamin A if you use that, or perhaps fish oil if you use that. But if you're taking herbs, again, you want to be prepared to take herbs at the very first sign of a cold or flu. And then if you do develop symptoms, continue to take them every few hours. So I do recommend not only ingredients like golden seal and echinacea and zinc, but you also may have other symptoms. So you may have cough, congestion, there may be pain, mucus, and insomnia. You want to treat those as they arise. And, I'm an herbalist, so I like herbs and nutrients, but it's really important that you and your family treat these symptoms. So even if you have to use Western medicine for some of these symptoms, it's better that you treat the symptoms than not. And let's look at insomnia. Now, Western drugs do not work very well for insomnia. Herbs and nutrients work pretty well for insomnia. Sleep hygiene program works probably the best for insomnia. But the point is again, if you have insomnia, a good time to use herbs for insomnia is especially when you have cold or flu, because you want to get a good night's sleep. You need to rest. Your body needs to heal. And so that's why sleep is so important. I mentioned drinking teas and other beverages is very important. From a Chinese medical standpoint, we want to avoid too many overly cold beverages. So we want to drink teas or room temperature water. Ensuring ventilation. Now, this is so important. And during the pandemic, one of the best talks I ever heard was from a physicist who specializes in room ventilation. I never even knew there was such a specialty, right? And this woman gives talks all over the VA, CDC, all this kind of stuff about ensuring ventilation in medical facilities and in office buildings. But we can ensure ventilation, good ventilation in home. How? That's right, by keeping the window open. They think that this is the reason why flus actually increase in the winter, because the rooms aren't as well ventilated. So ventilation is very important, and a really good air filter can also be useful. And at the clinic I go to, Holistic Clinic, they keep a air filter on all the time. So good idea to ventilate your room, keeping the window open, but also consider an air filter as well. This is particularly good for people with respiratory allergies, respiratory diseases, and of course, influenza and other viral infections. And then the other thing that can work is seeing a practitioner trained in acupuncture and herbal medicine, or seeing an integrative practitioner who does IV vitamins and nutrients. So although it's not necessarily proven, as far as I know, for a cold or flu, glutathione may help with symptoms. It may help with detoxification. So glutathione, as well as a vitamin C, can be administered in a integrative physician's office, and then they can hook you up with an IV and use vitamin C or perhaps glutathione to help your symptoms and help you recover more quickly. Now, what can acupuncturists and herbalists do? Well, they can treat all the signs and symptoms that go along with an acute or a prolonged cold or flu. And their acupuncture and herbal medicine is particularly good for conditions like chronic fatigue syndrome, long COVID, or people that are having maybe not having long COVID, but maybe they get sick. Maybe they've gotten repeat infections with COVID-19. Now, one of my colleagues, colleagues that I used to treat, has never developed COVID-19, but has developed at least 2 severe cases or bouts of influenza since COVID-19 began. So remember that it's not just COVID-19, it's also RSV and it's also influenza as well. So let's just round off the talk by talking about some general ways of helping yourself, your family members, and if you're a practitioner, your patients. So general things that help the immune system, such as taking vitamin C, taking medicinal mushrooms, taking adaptogenic herbs. These are things that you can do to help prevent getting an infection. Zinc is particularly good nutrient to not only help prevent infection, but also help to resolve colds and flus. And the key there is using a good form of zinc and to make sure you're taking an adequate dosage. Now, some of you may know about elderberry. It's certainly widely sold in drugstores as well as health food stores. I think that elderberry is something you could take to help you recover from a cold or flu, but I haven't found it that useful. So be that as it may, when I discuss the top flu fighters, I do not mention elderberry, but it's certainly something that you can try. It's also important, as I mentioned, to treat symptoms, and staying hydrated is very important, and soothing that sore throat. So echinacea tends to kind of, if you take it a tincture, it tends to help soothe a sore throat by kind of deadening those pain receptors in the throat. So if you can gargle with echinacea tincture, you could actually gargle for 30 seconds to a minute and then swallow if it's echinacea. If it's a more caustic herbal blend, you might have to gargle and then spit it out. So you want to soothe that sore throat. So there's teas, soups, stews. Ginger tea could be particularly good if a person doesn't have high fever and they have a common cold or influenza and they don't have a fever. And then turmeric is kind of a new one to consider, as it's very anti-inflammatory. So you can make a real nice tea by using something like peppermint, or maybe use chamomile, or maybe use ginger, and then maybe you can add some turmeric and some other herbs if you want. But remember that gargling can be useful for not only sore throat, but also coughing as well. Even salt water can be helpful. So a half a teaspoon of salt water of salt in water can be very useful to switch. Now, if you're using salt, though, of course, you want to swish and gargle and spit it out, because too much salt can be raise your blood pressure and have other bad symptoms. And the last tip I want to give to you is this idea of using honey. So I've read some research that shows that honey is as good as any cough medicine. So you can just use honey by itself. I attended a really fascinating conference in Thailand about herbal medicine. And one of the presenters was from India, and he was able to talk about how he could use specific flower honey for specific symptoms. Now, I don't really recall the talk because it was about 4 years ago, but I think he said things like, well, eucalyptus is good for the lungs and throat. So if we use eucalyptus honey, that has even a better effect on coughs than regular types of honey. So this is just an idea of, and so he did a whole research project on, I use this flower honey for this symptom, I use this flowered honey for this symptom. Really fascinating workshop. And of course, this is very important because in a poor country like India, not everybody can afford herbs or drugs for their cold or flu, but they probably can afford honey, especially if they can raise it or raise honey themselves. So this concludes today's workshop on what works and what doesn't work for influenza, RSV, and COVID-19. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this, and be sure to hit the alert button to be notified of new videos each week. For more information, visit our website, getwellfoundation.org.